Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm going to try to not talk about volume this Tuesday, but it seems like that is the number one topic these days. But I'll put it on the back shelf here for a little while. All right. Well, here's a question on a 510 dozer. What's the best spot for traction? Is there a made spot for it, or is it a trial and error kind of thing? I am pretty sure for most boards it goes on the tail, like not maybe all the way off the back edge of the tail, but up a few inches, like a couple of inches above the plug. We used to. When decking first came out, it covered the whole board. I think it was Herbie Fletcher's Astro deck, and the very first year it was out, it used to cover the board from nose to tail decking, and then it evolved into a center patch and a big tail patch, and over time, I think people call them stomp pads. Some people call them stomp pads. I just use the word traction pad, but it's basically for your back foot. And it comes in various thicknesses, various kind of fit-footed parts on the rear of it, like a rise but. I wouldn't worry too much about exact placement. And the dozer's the same as most other boards. You just put it a few inches up above, an inch or two up above the leash plug, and you should be good to go. This is a good question. Is the Dort good for a beginner intermediate surfer? And I've told the story many times. The Dort was originally a fish, like designed to be ridden under 6 foot, pretty much, and it was an accident. I told that story, but it turned out that it became a very popular board, and it was even very advanced surfers liked it because they could ride it small, and it had a lot of glide. It was very loose, and but if you're a beginner intermediate surfer, you can get a Dort shape. I mean, I think I've shaped like an 8-foot Dort for somebody. But when you're a beginner surfer, maybe not so much intermediate, but you want some length and some width and thickness. The Dort design, typically, like I said, is designed for under 6 feet or up to 6'2", but I build a handful of Dorts that are 6'6", 6'8", 6'10", and they have 50 plus liters. And if you order a bigger Dort, that will help you out if you're a beginner. When you're a beginner, there's there's a lot of people that, whether it's their first board or their second board, they want to go too small, and you'll look cool walking down the beach with it. You'll look probably a little awkward paddling out on it, and you're gonna look like you're having difficulty catching waves, and you probably are. So I'd say stick with a fuller shape, a fuller outline, lower rocker, higher volume, designed for a beginner or an intermediate. And repeat myself, with the Dort, you can have blown up to any size, but if you're a beginner, I'd say stay away from anything under 6'6". All right, here's another volume question. Does more volume slow down a board? Well, it depends on what you mean by slow down. In terms of looseness, maneuverability, typically a lower volume board is more agile, but there becomes a point in the surfer's ability, where, once again, if they're beginner, intermediate, low volume boards start to complicate things for you, and they make it more difficult. High volume boards catch waves easier. They don't take as much skill to get them going as fast. You can kind of stand there and go pretty fast, depending on the wave. If the wave's lined up and it's got a good pace to it, the board will keep up with it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, my initial reaction was, no. I mean, more volume slow down the board. No, it helps. It helps the board glide. It helps it stay on top of the water. But if you're a better surfer, you'll have a more difficult time burying the rail and changing your line and turning. And you see the best surfers in the world riding pretty low volume boards, about a third of their body weight. You convert the liters to, you convert the kilograms into liters. So it depends on your ability level, really, what size your board riding and how fast it's going to go. I want to step up from this 6.0, 19, 2.44. How much bigger should I go for overhead, double overhead types of waves? I'm intermediate like everyone else. Tears. 39 years young. If I'd say, I used to tell people, when you go on like an Indo trip or something, or Fiji, get your step-up board like 2 inches longer, 2 to 3 inches longer, and we used to have what we called step-up boards, and that way you'll be able to have a little bit narrower lines, narrower tail, and you can throw more rocker into the board and it'll handle more juice. But if it's your only other board, I would say go 4 to 6 inches longer. A couple of liters more volume. I'm going to do a little sideways sketch on this. The widest boards are, in the short board zone, are the little fishy things and boards, alternative boards like that. But for a performance shortboard, that is a narrower board than the fishy types. And as you go up in length, it should start to get a little bit narrower, not much, like 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch max, maybe, as you stretch the lines out. But once you get up into around the 7.6 zone, 7.8 zone, the board needs to start getting wider again to maintain template curve. Otherwise, if you have a 9-foot board that's 18 and 5/8, the lines will be so parallel that when you drop down on the wave and you go to do a bottom turn, it's just going to want to run. And a lot of the 9-foot boards I make are 20 and a half, 9.6, maybe 21, 21 and a half, and 10-footers 22, 22 and a half. And so back to the question, step up. I'd shoot for 4 to 6 inches and a couple of liters more volume and a fraction narrower. Next question is someone just...
Any big difference between the hatcher and the heckler?
The hatchet is a full-on flat, like a legitimate flat deck board. The heckler has a flatter deck than normal, but it's still got a little bit of light crown to the deck, and it feeds into a fuller rail. But the hatchet is part of the family of flat deck boards that we're offering, and the deck, especially in the middle 2/3 of the board, the deck is very flat. And I might put a light crown up in the nose area and a light crown back under the back foot, just very, very subtle. And the rails are very low, they're low apex, and they feel full at the top, but there's enough missing in the just above the apex, a little straighter zone than regular rails. And that's, it's the hatchet, the shiv, the blade, the 84, all have that kind of similarity. So I'm 17 and 5'10". Well, I'm 17, 5'10", worked good for me when I was 15. Okay, that's cool.
I was responding to somebody else.
Oh, what is your recommendation on a shortboard for a 15-year-old?
Yeah.
Well, that's when you're younger, you're definitely more flexible and agile than you are as you get older. But it depends on your size. I've built boards for 15-year-olds that weigh 100 pounds and 15-year-olds that weigh close to 200 pounds, and that's kind of where the volume comes into play. A lot of it depends on your weight and then your ability. If you're just starting out, once again, if you're a lighter 15-year-old, to start out on maybe a 7-foot egg or something like that that's wider and flatter. If you're heavier, then you should probably start out on 7.6 or an 8-foot board. But as you progress maybe into the intermediate stages, you'll probably want to try and ride the shortest board possible. And I get guys that are your age, they're tall, 6'2", but they weigh 130 pounds, 40 pounds, and they want to ride a 5'8" like their buddies. And it's just the height has something to do with the equation too. I generally try not to make boards, your progressive short boards, too much shorter than, 2, maybe 3 inches shorter than you are tall. So if you want to email me back your height and weight, I can give you a better recommendation. Saludos, Puerto Rico. Are you guys going to ship to Canada sometime?
We have to wait till the borders are open.
Yeah.
I know with the COVID thing is.
Yeah, we unfortunately with this COVID thing, we don't know how long it's going to be. We used to be able to ship boards up to Canada, and we did. Quite a few customers up there. But as long as this COVID thing is around, as long as the borders are closed, you might have to drive. Can you drive across the border from Canada to the United States? You can drive.
No, they have to close border. The borders are closed.
So sorry. It's COVID thing. I don't know. I think there's going to be I think there's a second wave definitely happening right now. What's the best board for a beginner in price? Well, it's like, I remember when I started playing golf, and I could kind of afford any golf clubs I wanted, but there's something about me, I didn't go out and buy the most expensive clubs right away. I kind of said, well, maybe if I don't like it, then I haven't spent too much money. But sure, there's $100 surfboards at Costco, and when you're when you're just starting out, they're probably just as good as a hardboard made by a top shaper. To learn to catch waves, to stand up and angle. It used to be we had a lot of that business, but Now it's all coming from Asia. So if you want to support the Asian board building companies, anything under about $400 is made in Asia. So,
this guy says I'm 40 and 5'10" and 305 pounds. What kind of board would you make for me? Not a longboard. 305 pounds.
Well,
5'10", 40 years old.
4 years old. I mean, I've made sailboards for people that are 6'10" and 24 inches, 25 inches wide that are 3 3/4 thick. And that, you could probably surf on that. But if I was going to specifically design something for you, I'd recommend like a Zeppelin or
Moby.
The Moby Fish is a great board. A lot of good history with that board. And you at 300 pounds, you're going to need some leaders. And, I think to keep the proportions of the board semi-right, you might have to go 8 foot minimum, 23 inches minimum, and 3.5 inches minimum. And in actuality, probably a little bit more length, a little bit more width, a little bit more thickness. You can email us, service@rustysurfboards.com, and make sure your specs are on there, your age, your weight, your height, and your phone number, and I'll be happy to put together a board for you. I'm a pretty big guy. It's like, well, I've shrunk a little bit, but I was 6'4" for a lot of my life, and 240, 250, 260, and I get guys that size that are trying to order 6'10s, and I'm going, why? Why? Don't you want to catch waves? Isn't surfing about catching waves and having fun? You're not going to bust airs. Probably not. So.
This guy says, I'm riding a 6'6" dwarf. Would like to get a short board with less length, but still offer still the volume that dwarf offers. What do you suggest?
Well, the 6'6" dwart, in terms of the shape of the dwart, it's a very high volume shape. It's wide nose, wide tail, and it's thick. It's got a flat tur deck full of rails, and there's not many other. The dwart is initially from a fish, but other than a fish. I could make you one of our flatter deck boards, probably the Hatchet, a little bit wider. Maybe go 6'4", 6'3", and go 22 wide and 3 and change. Once again, when people order boards, it's so important that you give the shaper a little bit of information. The most important information is how much you weigh. Probably the second most important information is be realistic about your ability. And then height and weight come in. But those 4 things, especially the weight, I get so many orders with people that just don't give me any information except the board they want. And a lot of times when I get in touch with them, I find out that they're a beginner and they want a 5'10", and so yeah, your ability and your weight are super key, and if you have any questions, you can email me at service@rustysurfboards.com, or questions for next week's talk. What else you got?
I'm 6'3", 230 pounds. What size shortboard would be good for medium-sized surf? The guy's 6'3", 230.
Yeah, I can relate. I was almost 6'4". I'm probably less than 6'3" these days. But my son, 6'4", 220 pounds, and his go-to shortboard was typically the same length or a couple inches longer than he was tall. But his step-up boards were like 6'8", 6'10". I think. Once again, you didn't mention your ability. What's his age?
He didn't put the age. He's 6'3", 230.
Yeah, I mean, if you're 20 years old,
yeah,
you could ride less of a board. If you're 40 years old, I would say you need to start going longer. But with the information you've given me, I would say 6'8", 6'10", and make sure you don't go too narrow. 20 and maybe 20 3/4 meet at the minimum, and that's a step up. So there are performance shortboards that they can stretch their limits out to maybe double overhead. But if you haven't ever ridden a step up board in bigger surf, you'll be psyched. I mean, it gives you so much more confidence on catching waves, on how much more control you have dropping in. Your first turn you can do with complete confidence. And I think everybody's first board should be a little bit bigger, fuller board. I think everybody's next board should maybe be a little bit shorter, not like the performance shortboards that the pros are riding, but shorter. Your third board, I think, should be or second board even, a step up, especially if you like riding bigger waves. And I remember the first couple of years I surfed, I just had one board and rode it every day. But it was I'd been surfing probably about 2 years before I started making myself step ups, or for years. I say I shaped my first surfboard like in the fall of '69, but for several years after that, I got board shaped from a lot of great shapers, and it wasn't a deal breaker, but I liked to watch them, and most of them were very accommodating, and the list is pretty long. But I think the first gun I got was a Mike Hinson, and that was about 19. It was probably very few of you will remember, but he made several hundred boards, guns that were all golden yellow with a big blue tapering spear down the deck. And I was lucky enough I got an 8.2. It was, the first winter I went to Hawaii, and I tripped in a board. I felt like a Cadillac, and it helped me get my confidence in bigger waves.
I got a good one. Why E-poly? Why E-poly?
Why E-poly? Because polyester resin is going to be outlawed one of these days pretty soon. The epoxy resin is part of the equation. It's a big part. I say on my website and whatnot that it's it's greener. It is greener, epoxy resin. It is a little lighter, not much, but a little lighter. It's stronger. It has a longer shelf life in terms of flex and denting. And it's, I think epoxy resin, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, there's been so much interest in it in the surfboard industry. When I first started building epoxy boards, it was like December 5th, 2005, Clark Foam closed. Got a fax about midday, and I thought it was a joke, but an hour later I was on the phone to Greg Lohr. But the first epoxies had a tendency to yellow, and there are a few other issues with it, but so we filled the stores up with epoxy boards, and a month later they all called back and said their boards are turning yellow. Oh, great. But as time has gone by, they've evolved surfboard specific resins that are very clear, very strong, and I believe that's the epoxy. I mean, the epoxy's here now. I'd like to say it's the future now, but there's still it. It costs a little bit more. It takes a different sort of set of skills to work with epoxy. And when I first started building them, I built them in the 80s for wave pool contests and things like that. But the first time I started building epoxy boards and numbers, there were very few epoxy laminators around. I used Greg Mungle, and I had a building next door that had a batting cage and storage and stuff in it. But we converted it to a little epoxy factory for Greg, and I still subbed out all the rest of my polyester boards to about 6 or 8 different glass shops. But so people are starting to appreciate the performance of epoxy. The core, the polyurethane core, it's evolved a little bit since Clark Foam. It's gotten considerably better, I'd say. There's but it's still got the same basic properties. It doesn't soak up water as fast as EPS, but it will take on water. But for most, if you're going to get an epoxy board, that's the best place to start, is at E-Poly. The EPS with epoxy has got its place. With the EPS core, it's a lot less dense than the polyurethane. I mean, the blanks weigh. Polyurethane blank weighs 4.5, 5 pounds, maybe. Maybe 5.5. The longer they get, the bigger they get, the heavier they get. But EPS is the blanks are probably 40% lighter, but they soak up a little bit more resin. So back to the EPS epoxy, they're good for small waves because they're very sensitive. It's like you don't really have anything in between the top layer and the bottom layer, so the energy that's transmitted is much more sensitive, I guess. And the boards are good when it's small and it's clean, but when it starts to get bumpy and stuff, a lot of people say the ride is like, the board's too agitated or too sensitive. And I've made guns. The EPS comes. Most people use 1.8.
Garrett McNamara guns.
Yeah.
EPS.
Yeah, I've made Garrett McNamara a lot of guns over the last 15 years, and most of the time he went to EPS, and I made myself EPS guns because I would order 3-pound EPS foam, which is solid, and I made Jamie Sterling some EPS guns, and a few other guys, but for the most part, EPS epoxy is looked at as more of a small wave construction. And then there's the Torsion Spring, which is the extruded styrofoam. It's different from the expanded styrofoam. The expanded styrofoam starts out as little tiny beads, and then they're put into a mold, whether it's a big block or the shape of a surfboard, and it's heated up, and then it expands, and then it seals, under pressure. And so the extruded form is more of a kind of a vertical column. It's got doesn't have the beads. It's got like a vertical column structure to it, and it's waterproof. It's been around the building industry for 40, 50 years, and it's always been blue. And but that is a great construction. It's got you've got the properties of epoxy, but you have the properties of a waterproof blank. But it's got great flex. It's got great memory, and it's a little bit sturdier than the EPS. And I've been slowly trying to work my way towards all epoxy glassing, whether it's on PU or it has to be on EPS, it has to be on Torsion Springs. But I think over the next year or two, I'll be moving closer and closer to exclusively using epoxy resin. What else you got?
Opinion about the SD model.
The SD model is a model that I designed for a stab in the dark several years ago for Dane Reynolds. Excuse me, Dane. I think he surfed it in South Africa, and he liked the board. If he doesn't have anything bad to say about a board, I think he likes it. But he scratched his head and he said, "Oh, the tail template's kind of weird." But the footage of him surfing that board in the stab video, it's solid. It's very good, very good surfing. And this SD has got a bordering on not a very deep, but a deep concave, starting semi-deep in the center and getting deeper between the feet. And it's been probably one of the most popular shortboard designs that we have, performance shortboard designs. Which leads me to something I've done in the past, and I did this for somebody last night. He was interested, he'd been riding an SD, but he's getting a little bit older and he needed a little bit more glide and carry. And so I programmed him an SD, and I gave him a nose that was a half-inch wider. And my statement with that was, it's going to give you a little bit more planing area up front. You'll get in the waves a little bit easier, and you'll get through sections a little bit easier. And a half-inch width, not necessarily in the center, but half-inch of width period doesn't add that much volume, but it really affects the way the board rides. And going a half-inch wider, half a liter at the most, 4/10 of a liter. Yeah. Half an inch longer? Come on. I get guys that insist on 5/10 and a half. And the difference in volume is 2/10 of a liter. Trust me, I've worked that out. 3/10 maybe at the most, but it's insignificant. In terms of the ride, if I gave you two boards and I didn't tell you how long they were, and you weren't allowed to measure them, and you weren't allowed to compare them, standing them up next to each other, you might be able to tell that one board is a half-inch longer, but I kind of doubt it. Another question?
Do you believe starting with a fish surfboard would be better overall than a longer board?
No. Yeah. No. Fish is a specialized board, and it takes a certain amount of skill to ride them. Yeah. And they, primarily because of the outline, it's a very full outline, but also because of the rocker, it's a very flat rocker. It takes some skill to ride them, and I would not recommend a fish unless you're getting like a Moby fish or a not so Moby fish, unless you're getting something like in the 7 to 7.6 range for a beginner. But definitely not, a 5.8, 4.19 fish. But we have plenty of other shapes that lend themselves to beginners. And as you get better, you can still ride them and enjoy them. And there's guys that rip on smoothies and guys that rip on Moby fishes. And but yeah, I'd stay away from a typical fish, because fish typically means a short, wide, flat board.
I think this guy is 53, 6'2", weight 6'2 and a half, 225. intermediate, advanced. What length, board, and model for waist to overhead surf would you recommend?
You're 6'3", 6'2"
He's
and a half.
6'2". He's 6'2" and a half.
Yeah, a half inch makes a big difference.
No, he is 6'2" and a
But
half.
I know, because I was 6'4" and I was 6'3" and a half, and now I'm probably 6'2" and a half. But and he's 225 pounds.
225.
And he's intermediate.
To advanced.
Intermediate to advanced.
Overhead surf.
And he's
Waist to overhead.
He's old again, 50.
53.
53. I used to joke about it as I got older, but there's some truth to it. Every year I got older, I'd add about an inch to my surfboard length. So I'd say if you were, it's insane that you're surfing at 52. It's great. That's insane. But you're not as agile and as flexible as you were when you're 20. If you're 20, I'd say 6'4", 6'5", 6'6". Bringing it on close to 21 at least, and maybe more than 2 3/4, but 2 7/8 at least. But as you get older, your reaction time slows down, and a little bit more board helps. I'd say 6'10", 7 foot minimum, but there are guys out there that can still ride. As they get older, they can still manage to ride shorter boards. But if you ask them, really, are you catching many waves? Well, not as many as I used to, and that goes back to my thing: more waves you catch, the more fun you have, and in the end, that's what surfing's about.
Do you have different board shapes to freshwater? Like I surf the Great Lakes.
Well, it's less buoyant, but it's
Yes, maybe.
It's EPS would be good. It's all you did. If you mostly surf river or freshwater waves, standing waves, whatever. The energy is so different on the waves. I don't know if you necessarily need a lighter board, but
you asked about different board shapes.
Board shapes. Well, I don't. I imagine anything shorter and a little bit wider out of all the designs that we have would probably do the trick. And Pedro mentioned EPS. That EPS epoxy is the lightest construction, and that might come in handy too for river or standing waves.
Have you made any tweezers lately?
Yeah. When Martin Potter, the year he won the world title, he worked with a guy named Will Jobson on the Twinsers, and he was sponsored by Glenn Minami, and Glenn made him, and I was fascinated by him, and I made a few, and the one thing I noticed is that the fin placement, especially on the small fins, was very crucial, and it had the fin placement had semi-predictable effects. Like if the fins were too far forward, it would draw the turns out too much, and you would feel all the fin area. If it was too far back, it was really not influencing the main fins that much. But if the base of the small fin is roughly lining up with the front, the front of the main fins, and they split the difference in the distance from the rail of the front of the fin, and they pointed towards the same place as the front fins, it's a bizarre feeling. I still remember my first couple of turns, it didn't feel like I had any fins, but yet the board held and it accelerated. And they work, and I still got orders for a few. Stu Kenson, he's a good friend of mine, and he used to sand for me, and then we went to shop together at IB, and he started shaping. But I had a Twinser, and he became intrigued by it. He wrote it. And he said, "This is the best frickin' surfboard I've ever ridden." And he still to this day makes quite a few Twinsers. And Stu's turned into a great shaper. And so yeah, I make a few. We made so many at one period. We had a box system and a Twinser, a specialized Twinser fin made by the fin companies. And the fin, I think maybe the fin needs to be about 3 inches tall, kind of more upright, and about a 2.5 inch base, give or take a little bit.
Rusty, why don't you see baby squash tails on step-ups anymore?
That's a good question. I think people, as soon as they go to a step-up these days, they pretty much go to like an elliptical tail or a full round pin or a round tail. But there was a time when baby squashes were kind of the go-to on step-ups, boards 2 to 4 inches longer. The typical squash tail. The squash tails, how I measure them is 1 inch up from the tail, because there are so many variations on a squash tail template that I found it impossible to measure a squash tail at the 0 point. So I figured, well, I'll do them all 1 inch up. But typical shortboard is 6 1/4 to 6 3/4, 1 inch up. But I'd build boards that were, under 6 inches, close to 5 inches, sometimes even 4 inches. And once again, it goes back to every tail shape has a different feel to it, which reminds me, I wanted to bring up David Barr and his shapeshifter fin system. Dave rode for me in the 80s, and he started shaping, and he's got a full-grown son now who's a great surfer. But several years ago, Dave came to me with this interchangeable tail system, and I think he's got from swallowtail to dovetail to squash tail to square tail to round pin. I think he's got about 6 different, I could be wrong, he's got about 6 different tail shapes, and every different tail shape provides a little bit different feel. And so, back to the difference between a round pin and a squash, you just have a little bit more area behind your back foot and a little bit more release. And I posted on Instagram a few days ago, I think. A squash-tail blackbird. I haven't made very many of those, but there's no reason you can't put an arrow squash-tail on a blackbird. This is a dog barking coming.
No, if Kelly Slater called you up today and asked you to make him a daily driver,
I'd tell him to take a walk.
What mother of yours would you go with?
Well, he indirectly, he didn't. I know Kelly. I'm not close to him, but I know him. But Derek Hind was fairly close to him at one point. And gosh, this is like 20 plus years ago. Derek Hind ordered an 84, but he ordered it for Kelly's. I guess he and Kelly are fairly similar in size, but his intentions were to give it to Kelly to ride, or Kelly asked him to order it or something. But Rick Hammond, who's been my head shaper for decades, before he shaped for me, he used to shape Kelly's boards. It's been 30 years, I guess, but he used to shape Kelly's boards.
Yeah, but you're missing the question. What model would you make him out of your line, our line?
Man, I'd make him a blade.
Blade?
I'd make Kelly. If Kelly came to me and he said, "Build me
board.
any board you want that you think I would like,"
Yeah.
I'd say a blade, a 5.8 or a 5.9 blade.
Channels?
No, not channels. Well, the channels add bite and they give you a little bit more direction and a little bit more drive out of turns. The concave bottom is much. The blade channel bottom has got very shallow features in terms of concave and V, but it's enhanced by the channels. Whereas the blade concave, it's got a concave that deepest point once again is just behind center, and it's about 0.2 to 0.2223 inches deep. That's okay.
Ellie is asking for light.
Oh, okay.
No?
All right.
She said it was too dark.
All right. A couple more questions, and I'm going to have to wrap it up. Pedro.
There was one guy said, Rusty, tell them foam is your friend.
Yeah, it won't make sense to you until you get older. But foam is your friend. This whole volume thing, it's one component of a surfboard. Nobody ever asked me about rocker, entry rocker, exit rocker, and I tell you what, you might not feel a 1/4 inch change in your tail rocker, but you'll feel 3/8 of an inch. You'll definitely feel a 1/2 inch in the turning radius of your board. Fin placements. People go, I want my fins offset 1/2 inch, or I want my fins back 1/2 inch. I mean, in the early days of the thruster, I used to build boards for Aki, and he's very powerful, very back-footed, and he used to have pretty big fins, and his back fin was 2 3/4 inches off the tail. And if I moved him up, he didn't really like the boards. He liked almost all of his boards, but he didn't like them as much. And I made boards for Tom Carroll for a little while, and his front fins were 10 1/4, and his rear fin the tip of the fin was practically hanging off the end of the board, and it was 2.5 inches up. So I'd say in the early days of the thruster, there was more of a variation of fin placement. So nobody asked me about fin placement these days. Nobody asked me about rocker. Nobody asked me about outlines, proportions, the balance of the templates. The beauty of a custom board is if you like a particular model, you can say, I like this model, but could you make it not the middle, but just fill out the nose a touch? Yeah, of course. That's a beauty of a custom board. But if you're a young, intermediate, advanced surfer, yeah, you should pay attention to your volume on your short boards. And as the boards start to get longer, the volume's going to creep up. But if you're a recreational surfer, I would definitely not stress over a 1/2 liter. Definitely not. A liter is questionable, but you should give your shaper, whoever it is, the leeway of at least a liter, and perhaps 2 liters, depending on your ability and how often you get to surf and what your goal is in your surfing. Whether you want to bust crazy airs all over the place, or you just want to catch planeaways and get down the line. Okay, I got time for one more question. Pedro's my right-hand man, so.
A lot of guys just saying hi and thanking and
hi,
giving him a lot of compliments. But what about this list? Did you know that?
Which model is recommended for waves above 2 meters? For a long time, our standard step-up board is called the Traveler. Like I said, if you're going to travel and you're going to be getting double overhead waves.
I got one good here. Sorry to interrupt, but I think it's really good. Flat that. Explain, please.
Okay, I'll explain that. I'll give a brief.
Yeah.
So it used to be called a Traveler, but the boards over the years has become kind of obsolete because it's got so much nose rocker and it's so narrow up front that we started experimenting with a Slayer, which was a step down board for slabby type waves about, 12, 15 years ago. And it was a big success, but then people started to realize that it had limitations. It was kind of a pull-in and grin board. And then we designed the Slayer 2, which was a little bit more balanced template. And then I designed the Blackbird, which is kind of our go-to step up all the way up the ladder. And the last question is?
Flat deck. Please explain. That's a good one.
Flat deck. Flat decks. I remember the first really flat deck board I saw was when I was working at G&S, and it was about summer of 71 or 2, and it came from Australia. It was a 7.3. It had a completely flat deck with boxy angular rails, and I was tripping on it. I can't remember who the shaper was. But then, Brewer, as the boards evolved from long boards to short, like primarily in '68, a lot of boards were crown decks, but Brewer started developing flat deck boards, and I'm sure there's a ton of other shapers that did. But when you're the guy, you're the guru, you get all the credit. But Henson had fairly flat decks. And so I shaped fairly flat decks, and up, kind of not many people, as it got closer, later in the 70s, the decks were pretty much all crowned, and people kind of moved away from the flatter decks. I say flatter because they weren't completely flat. And I started getting more and more attention from better surfers in the early 80s. And I had a lot of great world-class surfers riding my boards before hockey. And they all kept wanting to go thinner and thinner. And I balked. I shaped them, the boards, thinner, but I started making the rails a little bit fuller. And especially in the tail, the last 18 inches, I made I think if I get credit for anything, it's the last 18 inches of the board. I made them thin. I made them very flat, and I made the rails semi, boxy but angular, but pretty steep up and down. And so the beauty of the flat deck board is, in order to maintain similar volume, I have to go about 0.2 to 0.25 inches thinner than a regular convex deck. And basic physics says that the distance between the two surfaces, as it decreases, you're going to get more flex. The board will flex easier. Imagine you have a 4-inch thick board, it's not going to flex at all. If you have a 2-inch thick board, it's going to be bending all over the place. So, I started working on the flatter decks and, discovering new, not discovering flex patterns, but evolving, the flex patterns in the boards. And I did this for quite a few years, until towards the late 80s. And Aki had moved on, and so the company was starting to grow, and I had a lot of great surfers. But I still had people once in a while that asked me about, the boards, make a board like he used to make around the time Aki came into the scene. And so I called it the 84 model, and it's kind of stuck around quietly until several years ago. We did a collab with Aki. We built 100 signature boards, and some of the people hung them up, but a lot of people wrote them and they freaked. And so over the years, we've developed several flat deck models. Like the Shiv is the SD basically with a flat deck, but it's a 1/4 inch thinner. But I can talk more about flat decks next time. I'm pretty much out of time, so thank you everybody for tuning in, and you have a great week, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday.
Don't forget to save